Dean Posamentier, thank you so very much for making time from your busy schedule to come and contribute to the oral history of retired deans of the School of Education. Uh, so could I ask, when did you serve as dean and how long did you serve?
Well, I served my last 10 years there as dean from 19 from 2000 to 2010, roughly speaking. But prior to that, I was associate dean for about at least that long a period of time. And prior to that, I was department chair and all kinds of things. So I've been doing administrative work along with teaching for quite a while.
Okay. And what were the unique situations that you faced as the dean?
We're told by the president that we had to um, join the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences as a department. So the whole thing collapsed into one department, and the morale in the school was horrible, and we had to start working our way out of that. And we did a number of things to do that. But at one point in time, when I saw that we were doing better, the big challenge was to get the school or the department extricated from the liberal arts and sciences and to recreate a school of education. And I remember going to the faculty senate, and I finally got up there and convinced them to vote in favor of the School of Education. And so we were able to get out. And then it was one dean, David Bushler, who this was before I became dean, um, who then was the dean of the various parts, architecture, education, and uh, one of the other areas. I'm not sure which one. In any case, once we got extricated, that was something that I had to do as associate dean, and then I took over as dean. I guess around 2000 or so, and it was quite interesting to do that. But I realized one thing that I've shared now with a lot of people who've gone into administrative positions at the university level, and it's something that people either don't are not aware of, take for granted, or do nothing about. And I think that's the most important factor for any administrator in higher education. And that is to understand that the faculty should make the decisions. Now, that doesn't mean there's chaos. It means that the dean could, or the administrator could be like the conductor of an orchestra, where you organize it and you make it work. And there were a lot of discussions at one point when we had to reconstruct as a school of education, where the question was, will there be 5 departments, 3 departments, 2 departments, 1 department? What will it be? And the faculty was arguing for weeks on end. Some wanted to be this way and that way and so on. And then I walked in and I suggested one possibility and I walked away. If you go back to when universities began, when the monks were the teachers, so to speak, there was no boss. The monks were self-regulated. And I think that's something that should go on forever in higher education. And unfortunately, it does not, because there's a big difference. A principal of the school says, you're going to teach this, you're going to do this, you do it, and that's the end of it. That should not be the case in higher education.
Okay, thank you. Um, Look, we wonder about your hopes for the School of Education as dean, and of course, one of the hope was getting the School of Ed back to being its own entity. In
Okay.
thinking about your time as dean, did you have other hopes for the
Yes.
School of Ed?
Well, hopes is one thing. You've always got to have a direction. You've always have if you sit back and just allow things to be the way they are, oh, everything's nice and comfortable and smooth, it doesn't work. If a store sells the same item for year after year after year after year and doesn't change it, they're going to be out of business. You always have to move along with the times and change things. One thing I did, and I'm very proud of this, is we raised quite a bit of money while I was dean. From the private sector, we raised over $10 million in those 10 years. And that's not counting any of the federal grants that we got as well from the faculty got. And that was wonderful. But those grants were very specific to what the school could do. For example, the I had the idea at one point. It's a funny story. I had the idea of creating sort of an institute, if you will, of training high school supervisors of mathematics, because at that point math was not doing very well in the city, and they needed something. And the supervisors of math were not where they should be. I went to the Petrie Foundation and I suggested we do something. And it was a funny story because I had to present to this board, and I said, I'd like to do this for the Manhattan high schools. And they said, gee, that's a great idea. What if you did this for the whole city? I said, look, I'm asking for $900,000. I don't know if I could do it for that. Well, just tell us what you think you need, and we'll come back to you later on. So I told him, I don't know, I told him about $5 million or something. I figured I'd multiply by 5, and went back to the office. And shortly before 5 o'clock, I get a phone call. Okay, we're going to give you $4.6 million to do the program for the whole city. And we did it, and it was great. So, I mean, this kind of thing was wonderful because it put the city college at the top of all of education. And that's one of the things that I was trying to do. And I'll give you another example. At one point in time, back about, a couple of things. One was back in the 90s, I guess that's before I was dean, yeah. There were two things we did which put City College gave it an international reputation. There was a tremendous shortage of math and science teachers at that time. We're talking about 1998. And I mentioned, I was in Austria, and I was having lunch with the then Minister of Education, and we're sitting there, and she's telling me how we have so many math teachers and there are not enough jobs for them, and they're driving cabs. And I looked at her and said, my God, this is crazy. How could you have a surplus when we don't even have enough here? So one thing led to another, and it took me this was probably in the winter. By about May, I got the head of personnel or human resources at the board to agree that we would try to recruit teachers from Austria. And that first year, she agreed to do that. She helped, the Minister of Education in Austria agreed to help. And we had quite a few applications, but we were very, very careful. We did all the interviews virtually and then directly. That is, the Board of Ed did. And it was called the Board of Ed at the time. And we brought in 26 teachers, math and science teachers, to teach in New York City. And over the next 10 years, from 1998 to 2008, we brought in over 750 teachers to teach math and science in New York City. Some of them are still teaching there now. Some stayed, they had to stay at least 2 years, and some stayed 10 years, 15 years. Some, as I say, some are still there now. And it was very, very successful. It was so successful that we got calls from all over the United States, Kentucky, state of Washington, Arizona. They all want to know if we could share some of them, because we made front page of the New York Times with this story. So it was well known, and it was it gave us a real boost. The School of Ed was different and better than everybody else in New York City. I'll give you one more example. I'll give you a couple more examples. At one point, again, shortage of teachers. So I did a program back in the 80s. This was 1977. Jimmy Carter had just taken over the presidency, and so there were a lot of unemployed engineers. And we did a quick program during the summer to retool these engineers, who all probably very well prepared in math and science, to teach, and that was very successful. Forward fast into the 90s, or was it maybe early 90s? Again, there was a shortage of math and science teachers. And Harold Levy, who unfortunately passed away recently, was the chancellor of the public school system at the time. And he called me and we noodled together and we came up with an idea called the Teaching Fellows. And the Teaching Fellows was a program where you took people who had the academic preparation, whether it's physics, chemistry, math, whatever, and gave them the quick push during the summer in education, pedagogical training, and they were guaranteed a position in the fall as a teacher. And that program still, I think it was running until the pandemic hit. I'm not sure if it's still running now. It was clear that we were the creators of it. And it showed up at the end when we had to do the NCATE um, uh, accreditation project, and we came out with perfect evaluation that first year. And not everybody in New York had the same good fortune.
Would there be anything else we should include that, about your memorable experiences?
Well, I was what's also memorable, I have to say. I mean, I was delighted to be able to hire so many good faculty, you included, and that's not easy. We were able also, on occasion, to get faculty from other countries. One other thing that I thought was very important, the relationship that the School of Education had with the Board of Education and with the state. I remember officiating, this was a funny story actually, officiating over the 80th anniversary of the School of Education 20 years ago. And it was I was able to bring in a bunch of Nobel laureates who graduated City College, even though they weren't in the School of Education, one of whom I'd written several books with. And they gave a certain prominence to the school. We were in the Great Hall. The chancellor came, all kinds of politicians were there. It was wonderful. And at one point, I'll never forget, can I tell a funny story?
Of course.
Okay. At one point, the chancellor spoke about the fact that, yeah, well, City College, Albert Einstein gave a lecture at City College. And then I had to tell the story, which I had planned to do anyway, because they wanted to bring that into it somehow, that when I first got to the college, the dean's secretary was Eva Kaiser, very lovely woman. And she told me a story which I will never forget. She was related distantly through her husband to the Einstein family. And she was invited to go to Princeton and spend a weekend there. And so she spent a weekend there. And I was telling the audience that when I mentioned Einstein, well, he mentioned Einstein, I said, but by the way, Einstein is also known for the fact that he did the accounting for the School of Education. And they looked at me like, "You're crazy? What are you talking about?" So I went on with the story. She got up one morning, early in the morning, sitting in the living room, and Dr. Einstein came down the stairs with his high-pitched voice. "What are you doing there? What are you doing there?" And she's sitting there with her bookkeeping, because in those days, you're talking about early 50s, and she had books there, and she was doing some whatever. And he came up and said, "Give it to me. I will do it." And he sat down there and he did it. So I said, "There you go. Einstein did the School of Education's bookkeeping." So, those were funny situations I had. But that episode of where we had so many people coming into the Great Hall to celebrate the 80th, not the 100th, the 80th anniversary of the City College was, I think, a wonderful experience, because not many places. I think we were at that time certainly the oldest public school of education around. And if I have it correct, I'm not sure I'm 100% correct, but I think City College is the oldest public institution in the United States. Some that are older weren't public at the time. They may be public now. I had very good relationship with just about every chancellor, that was from Rudy Crew to Harold Levy to Cortines and so on. And the Cortines one is a particularly interesting one. For 10 years in a row, I took the high school superintendents when they were real high school superintendents, when each borough had a superintendent plus one for special education. And I took them each year to Europe. We went to Vienna and one other city, went to Istanbul, went to London, went to Berlin, went to Budapest, Prague, wherever. And each time was an educational trip. We saw schools and so on and so forth. Well, on one of the trips, we went that we were in Vienna and we were told we were going to, and I remember so vividly walking with the superintendents to our meeting. And I said to Peg Harrington, who was then head of the high school division for the city, I said, what are we going to talk about today with the minister? He says, oh, we're going to talk about vocational education. I said, vocational education? What's that? Why is that coming up? I said, that's a little strange. She says, oh, you don't understand. It's going to be white collar. I said, okay. So we got there and they talked about a thing called practice firms. Okay, great. Well, they were so taken by this project. We got back to New York City. We met with the chancellor. I should tell you, one of the board members was also along on the trip. And we told Ray Cortinas of this program. He said, here's, I think it was $5 or $15 million. Start the program in 75 high schools. And so we started the program called Virtual Enterprise International, which still runs today. It's centered at the Martin Luther King High School behind Lincoln Center. But Iris Blank, who's one of the people who was selected to run this thing, it's a great program, highly funded by the corporate world. And City College was the one who started. But in the 10 years I was deaning, made a lot of headway. We were seeing clearly, and I'm not saying this frivolously, we were clearly seen as the number one place in education in the city. And it was great.
Speaking about the School of Ed and its impact on public education, and the School of Ed and its impact on New York City and beyond.
I encouraged faculty to apply for grants, which they got. And that was great because that always adds a lot to the program. You know, it's one thing to offer courses which are appropriate, which we did, and during my time, I remember we innovated with a lot of new courses, and that was great. But it's also important to go beyond that because as a professional school, your responsibility transcends the students that you have. You've got to go beyond that. You've got in-service responsibility. You've got responsibility for keeping up with change. You've got responsibilities to make sure that schools are properly fortified and so on and so forth. I mean, there's a lot there. And I think that's one of the things that I was very eager to make sure happened. And maintaining good relationships with the superintendents, with the people up in Albany, the chancellor, the commissioner. That was something I felt was very important, and it gave us. We got good press. I mean, we had a number of articles in newspapers and so on and so forth. So it's all very important stuff.
Al, thank you very much.